You said something at the Withville event that really made my ears perk up. And what you said was that we have things, if you are doing genealogy, that you may not be able to find on Ancestry. My father is an Ancestry.com nut, and I'm surprised he hasn't traced us all the way back to Adam, but he has traced our genealogy on all sides way back in the 1600s, and he loves those little rare finds. But there was when you said that there would be some things that we could find at the Library of Virginia that we might not find on Ancestry, what are some of those things that we could possibly?
Well, Ancestry has been able to digitize and index a wide variety of records, many of them federal records, U.S. censuses and service records of any veterans who served in wars, et cetera, et cetera. But what they have not done, they've done it a little bit, but not for most states. They have not been able to get down to the state level and the local level in all of their work so far. I mean, what they've done is amazing. But, for example, local court records or city records, they often do have birth and death records, but in court records you will find instances of an individual or a family interacting with the law, and in the process of that, sharing a lot of information that is invaluable. So when a will is contested, for example, family members are fighting back and forth and have to show why they feel they should have gotten certain things, and they lay out that story. The same with local court records. In depositions, they tell those stories. So we've got loads of those records that have never been digitized by anyone, and they can add a richness to family history. So I think Ancestry is phenomenal for just figuring out who somebody's parents were, grandparents were, life dates, key places they lived, and so forth. But what our collections can do, and why we are still a mecca for genealogists, is they can flesh out much more detail that you're not going to find in those kind of records. And I think the proof is in the pudding. In less than a month, the National Genealogical Society will be meeting here in Richmond. And they come back here, they meet all over the country, but they come back here. They try to come back here every 4 years, maybe 5 years, because of the riches here in our library. They meet 3 blocks away at a Marriott hotel, and whenever the attendees at that conference can sneak an hour or two away, they walk the 3 blocks and they're here in our reading rooms trying to fill in pieces of family history they can't find anywhere else. And I always say, if your family's been in the United States long enough, even if you live in California or Nevada, you have a Virginia ancestor. And that's why this conference is so popular when it meets in Richmond, because people come here to do that research. And these are people well familiar with Ancestry and online resources. Mm-hmm. So someday all that may be digitized, but it won't be in my lifetime. So we will continue to be a place for genealogical research.
You mentioned the Marriott Hotel. That's where, incidentally, that's where I stayed during my trip to Richmond. It's a lovely place.
Wonderful.
And also, something I was able to find in your digital collection that had just come available in recent years was a diary of a distant cousin of mine that talks about life on the home place where my great-great-grandparents lived. And she talks about life in the 19th century there, which was in Carroll County and Galax. And incidentally, I'm not too too sure. I don't want to own up to it completely, even if it is true, but we may or may not have some familial connections to the Sidna and Floyd Allen with the Carroll County shootout, because the Coolies are from the Carroll County, Grayson County border. So that's a very pertinent interest to us and our personal history when you mentioned that. But anyway, I was able to find that online and print it off at the the Witt County Historical Society and give it to my father as a present, which he was thrilled to have. You know, he is satisfied with the so and so begat so and so, and because he likes making all the connections. But me being a writer, I like to hear the stories about people. Who were they? You know, who were these people? What were they made of? And it sounds like that some of your collections with the court records and things would give a more in-depth analysis of that sort of thing.
Right, and it just adds, sometimes it's in a person's voice as they recount something to a court. So it adds that real connection to the past by actually hearing, you know, it's written, but you're really hearing somebody tell their story in a way that a public record just can't do. And it's wonderful. Yeah.
Yes. And now let's talk about you for a second. You have a very prestigious position as the Librarian of Virginia. So can you tell me, as we talked a little bit about when we were conversing in Whitfield, a little bit of your background, your Virginia roots, and how you came to be the Librarian of Virginia?
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in New Jersey and came to Virginia for the first time to go to graduate school at the University of Virginia. And my love and my passion is history. And I fell in love with the Commonwealth of Virginia. History is everywhere on the landscape. It's in everything. And it influenced everything that Virginia did. And Virginia made major contributions to our national history. But its history has also got some troubling aspects to it too, which makes it really interesting and very real. So I got hooked on Virginia. I love it as a place as well. We're in Richmond. We're 2 hours from the nation's capital, an hour from the mountains, 2 hours from the ocean. So you know, you can have it all, and it's a beautiful, beautiful state. So I decided I wanted to stay here. I taught for 2 years at Virginia Tech, but it was at a time when academic departments were shrinking a bit due to economic forces, and it was very hard to get a tenure track position. And I read about a position at the library here in Richmond doing historical editing, and I thought, I'm going to do that for a year or two, and then the college teaching market will open up. Well, I got absolutely mesmerized by the collections here, and I've been here ever since. And I was fortunate that some opportunities opened up for me to move upward in my career, but my real love has been the collections here and doing anything I can to help make them more accessible to as many people as possible. And that's been just an absolute joy to do.
And you have been the Librarian of Virginia since 2007, is that correct?
That's correct.
Which would be 16 years. Congratulations to you on that.
Well, thank you.
And what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of your job, and what are, concerning your work, what are you proudest of at the Library of Virginia?
The most rewarding part of my job now, because when I started, I was before I was Librarian of Virginia, and I was more actively involved in day-to-day things. and in many of the things I love. So the higher up you go in an organization, the less of that you actually do. But I would say now the most rewarding part of my job is that I can try to find the resources or clear the roadblocks out of the way for phenomenal staff who are doing that work. So whenever I can, when somebody can say, I wish we could do X, but we just don't have the funding for it, that I can work with our foundation or work with a granting organization and try to find resources, try to remove the roadblocks that, and open up those possibilities for our staff. I think the accomplishment that I'm most proud of is having been able to steer this organization through good times and bad. And I became state librarian in the summer of 2007, and within 6 months, the recession of 2008 hit, and we were making budget reductions that were pretty drastic. Mm-hmm. And so having to make decisions about things and people to cut, but to do it strategically in a way that would enable one to build back the organization when times got better. That was extremely stressful and extremely challenging. And I'm pleased to say, and I didn't do it alone. I had a terrific finance director and some others, but that we were able to weather those storms and a few that came after that without doing irreparable harm to the good work and the good people that we have here. So I think in my job, you have to learn how to navigate, the political changes, economic changes, social changes. And right now, the big challenge is technology. How do we continue to afford the level of technology that lets us preserve so much of our history in electronic format? Because it's not the same as doing it in paper. It's much more expensive to do it with technology. And how do we anticipate what the technological changes of the future will be so that we stay ahead of them? Because our field, even though we're preserving history that goes back to the earliest days of Virginia, it's a field that is constantly changing. And staying on top of that is something that's vitally important that we do.
Mm-hmm. And how many years total do you have with the Library of Virginia?
I actually go back 40 years. I've been here a long time.
Wonderful. And sounds like you've enjoyed every minute of it.
Yes. I sometimes reflect, and because I always thought I would go into college teaching. Do you miss that? Do you feel badly or wistful that didn't work out? And I will say no. I would not have traded the way things unraveled and occurred for anything, because it's been a great joy and a great privilege. This is a very special organization, and it belongs to all of your listeners, all of the people of Virginia. So we're just the caretakers of what's here, but it belongs to the citizens. And that's a great honor to take care of it and pass it on to the next generation.
You may have answered these last two questions that I have. We've talked about why it might be important for somebody from Wythe County to come to Virginia, to come to Richmond, to the Library of Virginia. But what do you think is the most important thing should somebody hear this podcast, one of the 12 people who might listen to it, if somebody decides to make the trip? What do you believe is the most important thing they can take away from a visit to the Library of Virginia?
I think they can visit our exhibit. They can attend some programs here. They can do research in the collections. But all of it will deepen their understanding and perspective on Virginia's history. I think that if, they may be interested in a particular piece of Wythe County history, but most Virginians also want to answer that question. Where does my area, what I know, where does it fit into the larger story? Mm-hmm. And I think that is something they had the opportunity to do visiting here. And I think people go away with a richer sense of what it means to be a Virginian and how Virginia has changed over the past 400 years. And if they come between now and November, they will be able to visit our exhibit called 200 Years, 200 Stories, and get a real sense of the richness of the collection, the variety of it, and the variety of stories that make up Virginia's history, individual people's stories.
The Library of Virginia has obviously many aspects of a very rich and complex legacy. The Library of Virginia itself. What would you say is the most important part of the legacy of the Library of Virginia itself?
I think it is, from the beginning, been a repository officially charged with preserving the records created by and generated by government, and the books and other newspapers, things like that, purchased by government for government's use and for citizens' use. But we've also collected lots of other things, private papers, business records, and so forth. So it's having the public records be complemented by the other aspects of Virginia history that we've collected is really, really important. But because we were required to collect all the public records of Virginia, there are voices and people's stories in those records that maybe past generations of librarians might not have thought to collect or might not have thought were as important as today we believe they are. So in a public record whenever a citizen has to interact with government, there's a record of that interaction. So we have in our records the stories, for example, of indigenous Virginians, of African American Virginians, of new immigrants to Virginians, going back to the very earliest days of our history, when perhaps the library and many libraries were not collecting those stories, but they are embedded in the public records that we've collected. So today, when we're trying to understand and reconstruct those histories, our collections have that. And that's one of the most important things, I think. So people who may not have been able to go to a library and find their histories before now realize they can find them here in those records. Today, we're more actively collecting in a wide variety of areas such as those. But those records from the very beginning are there. And I think it's one of the most important legacies that this library has to give to the citizens of Virginia.
Well, thank you so much, Sandy, for taking this time with me. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that I did not cover before we close?
You were very comprehensive, and I think covered most things. I would just say to your listeners that we are traveling around the state during our 200th anniversary this year, but we're looking at this as just the beginning of future outreach. So we will be back in your part of the Commonwealth, I can assure you.
Good. Please, in particular, come back to Wytheville. We would love to have you.
Terrific.
And thank you for your kindness to me during my visit last week. It is something that will be with me always, to have an opportunity to be a part of something as monumental as I believe the evening with Bill Leidy was. And when you said from the podium, and I want in writing that you said this, you said, when I met Zach 2 weeks ago in Wytheville, I knew instantly why Bill chose him to moderate the program. So that particularly touched me, and I just want you to know what it meant to me. And
well, it's true.
Thank you.
It's true. So you are a gift to Southwest Virginia, and I hope the folks there who listen to you and read your columns appreciate that.
Oh, thank you very much for those kind words, and I truly enjoyed moderating that event. That was so special. It was a very special evening.
Well, we were pleased to have you, and I wish you all the luck and success in the days ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, and we will maintain contact for sure. Thank you for all your kindness, and everybody, if they have a chance to go to Richmond, go see the Library of Virginia.
Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.